Welcome. Thank you for coming to our session, Tableau Services Manager Updates. Raise your hand if you have used TSM before. Great, almost all of you. That is so different from last year, and we love that. Now, raise your hand if you are a frequent user of TSM. You use it for your daily administrative tasks. A lot of you. Awesome. Well, I'm Becca, and I have been building TSM for the past 3 years. I'm here to tell you about how your feedback as frequent users has helped make TSM better over the past year.
Hi there. I'm Aaron, and I manage the TSM team. I'm here to talk to you about the future of TSM and to share with you some of the things we've learned over the past year. All right, let's get started. We'll begin with an overview of TSM. Then we'll talk about what's new since we released TSM a year ago. And then we'll look at the roadmap to see what's coming next.
Next, we'll do a deep dive into using TSM. We'll go over some tips and tricks for server administrators, as well as a self-service with TSM section where you can diagnose using the logs. Then we'll leave time at the end for Q&A.
All right, Tableau Services Manager, TSM, was released in 2018, first for Linux and then for Windows. Before we dive into the new features, I want to make sure we all have a shared basic understanding of what TSM is and how it works. So what is TSM? TSM lets you install, configure, and manage Tableau Server. For those of you familiar with the prior tools, TSM replaced Tab Admin. All right. TSM has a command line interface and a handy web interface, so you can access your server from anywhere. The web UI allows you to perform some of the day-to-day functions that you would do from the command line, but through your browser. And you don't need to have direct access to your production server. All right, so how does TSM work? All right. TSM is basically a set of distributed services, each with a different function. These are the TSM processes. These services are running all the time, even when Tableau Server is stopped. I want to highlight a few of these processes today. These are ones that we're going to reference later in the talk, so I want to make sure you have a high-level understanding of them. The first one is controller. Controller listens to the TSM REST API for requests, and then it makes decisions about what to do next. The coordination service, also known as Zookeeper, is the is the source of truth for the entire server. And agent is installed on every node and is constantly listening for changes in the coordination service. For example, let's say you want to add a background or process to one of your nodes. You would use the CLI or the web UI to change your topology. That would start a request. It would go through the REST API to your controller. Controller would update the coordination service with the desired state of adding a backgrounder. Agent would immediately hear that request or see that change in the Zookeeper and take action to add the backgrounder to the node that that agent is on. There's one more important TSM service called TabSVC, also known as Service Manager. TabSVC keeps an eye on all the application processes that make up Tableau Server. TabSVC's job is to restart any processes that fail or crash. It's a little bit like the responsibility of your operating system. And in 2019.2 for Linux, we actually replaced TabSVC with a more native service called systemd. So let's say your application server crashes. TabSVC or systemd will detect that and automatically restart application server for you. And lastly, there's a set of maintenance services. These services are spun up on demand. So if that service is done doing its work, it will shut right back down again. So let's say you wanted to back up your server. TSM will spin up the backup restore service. That will perform the backup logic, and then it will shut back down again. All right. So now you know what TSM is and how it works. But why did we build TSM? We already had tab admin. Why did we need TSM? So TSM has a much more flexible architecture that allows us to scale and build for the future. It enables some of the key features of TSM. It allows us to add new services to Tableau Server and even swap out components without needing to rebuild everything from the ground up. Some of those key features we shipped with in TSM, cross-platform. It runs on Linux and Windows. Tab admin was Windows only. The web UI to let you access your server from wherever you can reach it from your browser. A key feature that some people haven't heard about is hot topology. Hot topology allows you to make certain dynamic changes without restarting or stopping and starting the server to have those changes take effect. Currently, that affects backgrounder process and the physical server process. So you can add or reduce the number of those processes running at any given time without having to stop the service. You can tell if something is a hot topology change because the web UI will show an apply live changes button instead of just an apply changes button. And then you'll be asked to confirm live changes. So you can be sure that that's not going to cause you to have any downtime. And then a couple more key features that shipped with TSM. TSM was designed to have less downtime during upgrade by allowing you to do a little more of the work. You'd have to run a backup yourself before you upgrade. There's no need to uninstall because it installs side by side with the running server. And then the only downtime is during the actual switching over to the new version. And then TSM also has much more localization support. We launched with 8 languages, and I think we're up to 10 distinct languages now, so you can customize to the language of your choice. All right, I'm going to hand things off to Becca to talk about what's new.
Very loud high five. Okay, so last year we had just released TSM, and as I kind of alluded to previously, not very many hands went up at our talk of people using TSM. We had some feedback, but admins weren't using TSM for their day-to-day yet. Over the past year, that's all changed. We've gotten a lot of customer feedback, and we just want to say thank you. It is so valuable. It's helped us prioritize and scope our work, as well as make my work as a developer more meaningful. I'm going to talk about how we've used that feedback to improve TSM in 3 categories: reliability, performance, and security. The first and most important category to server administrators is reliability. Most of all, you want TSM to just work. The first feature we've made in this category is backup disk space estimation. We've always had a disk space check for backup, but it was about as accurate as a toddler measuring themselves. So we looked into improving this algorithm, and now we reach out to each of our stateful services to gather information about precisely how much space we need to back up. Because this estimation is more accurate, you can back up with confidence that you will not run out of disk space. As server administrators, you know sometimes you will still run out of disk space for other reasons. So we made recovery in this scenario better too. Maybe you've run into this situation after running out of disk space. TabSVC failed to write an essential state file, and now your server is all red. All of your processes are down. Previously, this involved a support call, some manual file editing, in order to get your server into a good state again. Now you can run TSM restart through the command line or the web UI in order to recover the state of your server. Status-based service reconciliation. Sometimes processes don't crash, which TabSVC recovers from gracefully, but they get into an unhealthy state. Maybe they're down or hung or otherwise unresponsive. In this scenario, we have always surfaced this information to server administrators, but it's been up to you to take action on this. You have to decide if you're going to restart the server or remove and re-add the process. Maybe you dig into the logs to try to figure out what's going on. Now we use this information to automatically restart certain services with Tableau Agent. This will increase the uptime of server and give you overall better availability. The second category is performance. In addition to reliability, server administrators want TSM to be able to handle enterprise-scale deployment operations quickly. Here are a couple of ways that we have made performance in TSM better. No compression backup. Backup can take a long time. Maybe some of you have experienced this. And for some server administrators, it is more important that backup completes quickly than that the file takes up a smaller amount of disk space. So you can run backup with the skip compression flag. You get about a 3 times faster backup with an uncompressed file that is 2 times larger. Status performance improvements. When we first released TSM, what? Would the restore be faster with an uncompressed backup? It wouldn't have to uncompress it, but I don't think it would affect the time very much. I would have to dig more into metrics for that, though. For status and performance improvements, when we released TSM, we were consuming too much CPU when querying status, with a control app for each of our 21 services when we released. Every minute, we would ping status and spike the CPU. We've now moved this status logic into Tableau Agent, our always running state machine server. So now you get the same reliability that you count on with status, but in a more performant way. Ziplogs date range. We have added a start date and an end date flag to Ziplogs so that you can gather logs from precisely the day that your error occurred. Maybe you ran into an error and 2 weeks later, support asks you to gather logs. And before, you had to get logs for 2 weeks. That takes a long time, and it makes a big zip file. So using the start date and end date option allows you to complete Ziplogs more quickly. The next category is security. Server administrators want TSM to be compliant out of the box. No extra commands to run. And here are a couple of features that we've made to take steps in that direction. The first feature is direct access. When we released TSM, you had to hard code admin credentials into your scripts in order to automate against TSM. For many server administrators, this meant they couldn't automate against TSM. Now, we will implicitly log in using the logged on or interactive users so that you can run scripts from the controller node without hard coding those admin credentials. Coordination service authentication. As Aaron mentioned earlier, the coordination service is the source of truth for TSM. We store all of our configuration and topology details in coordination service, and it makes it consistent across the cluster. When we released, we were relying on your firewalls to prevent access to the coordination service contents. We still recommend you deploy Tableau Server behind a firewall, but now we're moving towards a zero trust security model, requiring coordination service specific username and password in order to access Zookeeper contents. This is very similar to the Postgres security model, where we store a username and password in configuration. These are the releases for the features that I mentioned. Maybe you're able to use this feature already, and if not, we encourage you to upgrade to the latest to get those capabilities. I'll leave this slide up for a minute. You can also consult the Tableau releases page for more information on some of these features were integrated back to maintenance releases, and they list a month that will tell you which maintenance releases were released in that month. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Aaron to talk about the roadmap.
All right. Those are some exciting new features. My personal favorite is status-based service reconciliation. This feature is kind of a new concept for TSM, and it can now self-heal itself if things go wrong, which is a pretty cool feature. And I happen to know the engineer who wrote that feature, and she's in the room today. Great job, Becca. All right, roadmap. Yeah, let's talk about the roadmap. Quick note, I can't give specific dates for specific features, but this will be a list of things that we think are likely to land in the coming year. So the first category is backup improvements. We have several backup improvements we're very excited about. The first of these is incremental backup speed improvements. So your best bet is still going to be to use the no compression backup. That's the fastest backup you're going to be able to get. But if you do require some amount of compression, we're working on a faster version of a compressed backup. The second improvement we're working on involves much more detailed status reporting of what backup is doing as it is performing its work. Today, you might be running a backup and you can't really tell if it's stuck or not. So this will give you, fine-grained information. You can tell that it's actually doing stuff, and you'll feel confident and maybe not be tempted to cancel it in the middle. And yeah, you'll be confident that you know it's working. And then the third backup improvement that I want to talk about is backup and restore with configuration. So this basically just means we will back up and restore all your settings without any other extra steps needed. For some of you, that may be the case already, but if you're using something that's not handled in the current restore, like SAML and some other configurations, this will do it all at once for you. Another item on the roadmap is upgrade improvements. So there are some common server environment issues that people can run into during upgrades. So we're adding some system checks at the front end of upgrade to catch those problems before you get into a bad state with your upgrade. So for example, you might have file permissions that aren't working. And so this will catch some of those things, help you avoid that problem from the get-go, and now your upgrade will go much more smoothly. Since we launched TSM, I don't think we've really made major web UI improvements. So right now, when you make a change to your server and you're looking at the web UI, there's kind of a status overlay that shows you kind of the state of the service. You kind of get a general idea of what's happening on the server. Maybe you can see which services are having to restart. But starting with 2020.1, we're replacing that status overlay with a new progress panel. So this progress panel tells you kind of what job is running, what step it's on, how far along you are, and very detailed kind of information about what's going on behind the scenes. As well, if you've run this job before, it'll give you an estimate of how long it should take based on previous times you've run that job. In addition, certain jobs are cancelable. There'll now be a cancel job button. If you press that button, it'll pop up a confirmation dialog to make sure you really want to cancel that job. And so in combination with the estimate for how long the job's taking, you might see that it used to take 5 minutes. In this case, it says backup's going to take 2 minutes. That happens, right? So, but what if it's been half an hour? Now you can decide, maybe I should cancel this because something's not going so well. So yeah, you can cancel jobs from the web UI. And the next category, dynamic changes. We talked a bit about hot topology already. So this is for hot changes with processes on the server. We're working now on some hot configuration changes. So certain configuration values you'll be able to change without needing to have any server downtime. All right. TSM has a REST API. We don't really broadcast or publish a lot of obvious information. If you do a Google search for the TSM REST API, you probably won't find anything. But if you're digging around in our documentation, you can find it. What we'd like to do soon is release this formally as a 1.0 supported version. Up until now, it's been in alpha. because we were still making some changes and tweaks, and now we're at a point where we're ready to lock it down, and you'll be able to script against that API with confidence that it won't break your scripts when you update. All right, so that's the near-term roadmap. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about some tips to help you succeed in using TSM. Backup speed. So here's how backup works. You kick off a backup job, and as Becca mentioned, it goes out to each of the nodes and gathers any of the information about your files, and it pulls them back to the controller node. So what happens is, if you have your file store located on a different node from your controller, and most of your backup contents are coming from file store, you're going to have a very slow backup. If you co-locate your file store and your controller, you can have as much as a 3 times faster backup. And if you combine that with a no compression backup, you're off and running. The same can also be true a little bit for repository, although we find that most of the backup time is taken through grabbing the contents of file store. All right. So jobs in TSM. Sometimes you might wonder, why is my job not running? TSM only lets you run one job at a time. So if you're running, or maybe someone else is an admin at your company and started a job, you kick off a stop server request, and nothing's happening. The tip here is really just to be aware that you can list the jobs that are running, see where yours is in the queue, because every job that you kick off beyond the one that's running is going to just get added behind that one. And then you can cancel jobs using the TSM jobs cancel function, or now with the web UI, you can cancel the current running job. All right, and I want to talk a little bit about some upgrade tips. So we spent probably thousands of hours making engineering changes to the system in the past year. And probably the best tip I have for you is just to make sure you're on the newest version you can get your hands on, because you're going to get all of those awesome fixes and features in that upgrade. Secondly, if you're used to tab admin, you may be expecting the upgrade process to take a backup for you. TSM backup, or sorry, the upgrade, so TSM upgrade doesn't take a backup for you. We expect you to do that on your own. So just a tip to always remember to take that backup. And then just a reminder that TSM installs side by side, so you really don't need to uninstall TSM. In fact, you should not uninstall TSM, which is really what my next section is about, uninstall. People sometimes get a little confused with how uninstall should be used. So rather than uninstalling TSM before you upgrade, you use TSM's uninstall functionality to remove the prior version that you've upgraded from. So if you're upgrading from tab admin, yes, you will uninstall the server and then upgrade to TSM. But once you're on TSM, don't use the uninstall before you upgrade. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Becca. Thanks.
Okay, now let's get into self-service. Our logs have changed with TSM, and some of you might find it a little harder to diagnose errors because you're just not used to the new structure. So we're going to first walk through the overall log structure in TSM, and then go through an error scenario that you could see, how you can use the logs to diagnose the error and get your server into a working state again. This is the overall log structure in TSM. So on Windows, the default data directory is under C, ProgramData Tableau Tableau Server. And on Linux, it's under var, opt, Tableau Tableau Server. This is where all of your TSM information lives, other than your installed bits. Any configuration we're writing, any logs we're writing, it's all in this data directory. At the root of the data directory is a logs folder. It contains 2 logs, an app install and an app upgrade log. App install log is where you want to go if you see any errors in the install process. So on Windows, we have a click-through installer. Anytime you get an error in the click-through installer, you first want to go here. For Linux, there is an Initialize TSM script. any errors there, you first want to go to the app install log. For the app upgrade log, if you see an error in the upgrade script, you want to first go here. So now we're going to drill down into the data tab SVC directory. This is where most of your information about Tableau Server lives. There's a base logs folder, and in that, each service has a specific log folder. We're looking at the backgrounder log folder here because it's going to be referenced later. So in the backgrounder log folder, there's a control backgrounder.log. Control apps are responsible for starting, stopping, and configuring TSM processes. So if you see failures with those kinds of things, you should first look in the control log. Backgrounder.log is the service log for TSM, for backgrounder. And standard out backgrounder.log is one of many different kinds of logs that services will write. Each service has a different set of logs, and this is just indicative of that, but we'll be referencing the standard out log later. So this is the scenario. I ran a clean install. I set up and applied some initial configuration, because if I set configuration before initialize, it's faster. I don't have to restart server then. Then I run initialize, but it fails on the finalize topology step. This is what the CLI output would look like from that initialize job. You can see here that it failed on 90%. Finalizing the topology failed. Tells me the initialization was unsuccessful. This job failed due to an error. You have all used TSM before, so you've probably seen this C tab admin controller log error message. From every one of our jobs, we tell you to first look in the tab admin controller log, because anything that fails post-install, that's the first place you want to look. So we're going to go into the tab admin controller log. I go into the tab admin controller log folder, and in the tab admin controller log, I scroll all the way to the bottom and then search up for the word error. This is the first exception that I see, service operation timeout exception. It is a very common and pretty not descriptive exception that happens in TSM. It comes from Service Status Watcher, but I need to scroll up for more information here. I know that the Service Status Watcher gives up at some point. So you want to look for the words timing out. Service Status Watcher is telling us it's been more than 5 minutes since the last successful state transition, timing out. So it gave up waiting for something to reach a state. This log line from Service Status Watcher is going to tell you what it failed waiting for. Service Status Watcher is a class in tab admin controller that polls to see if the current and requested states match yet. So this log line will be repeated. It's important that you go to the last instance of this log line before timing out in order to know which service it was failing to start or stop. So the log line reads something like, there are 1 service instances on node 1, not in the desired state. Backgrounder 0 with status unavailable, and current deployment state enabling. So in this case, backgrounder 0 had status unavailable, and state enabling. Or in other words, backgrounder failed to start. As I said before, the control apps are responsible for starting, stopping, and configuring TSM processes. So I first want to go to the control app log in the backgrounder folder. But to my surprise, I open this log and see no error logs at all. And the last log line from backgrounder app is OK. That doesn't really tell me very much. So I go back out to the backgrounder log folder, and I see one other log. Standard out backgrounder log has this lovely descriptive exception. There is a port already in use, 8060, and the nested exception is JVM bind. So what I didn't tell you is that I had set some initial configuration. I did tell you I set the initial configuration, but one of those keys was the backgrounder0.jmx.port. I set it to 8060, and port 8060 is a default port used by Postgres. So if you use that port for configuration key for another service, it will fail either installing or starting, depending on when the port's used. So in order to recover from this scenario, I can run these few simple steps. I run TSM configuration set -k backgrounder0.jmx.port -v. I chose 8161, but any port that's not a default port will work. Then I apply the change. Of note, apply will fail, waiting for server to start. Ports are only selected on install, so Backgrounder isn't actually using this new port yet. But when I run Initialize, it will uninstall and reinstall all the services. So now my Initialize succeeds, and I have a server that is ready to use. And now I'm going to bring Aaron back up for Q&A.